From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, nationally syndicated across the country on the Biz Talk Radio Network, and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio WYBC and 1490 AM WGCH Greenwich. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business along with the business of politics and sports. From our show Sweet Spot, the Radical Center, as we like to call it, taking on Crony capitalism, gridlock in Washington, the major fiscal challenges, healthcare, debt, need to reform education. We've got bipartisan solutions to restore the American dream. Today on Business Talk with Jim Campbell, Joe Minarik, Senior Vice President and Director of Research for the Committee for Economic Development of the Conference Board. He was Chief Economist of the Office of Management and Budget for 8 years during the Clinton administration when a balanced budget was achieved. Served as Chief Economist to the House Budget Committee. Worked closely with former Senator Bill Bradley on the Tax Reform Act of 1986, another bipartisan solution at the time. His co-author is Steve Odland, former CEO of Office Depot and AutoZone, and their book is Sustaining Capitalism, Bipartisan Solutions to Restore Trust and Prosperity. Welcome, Joe. How are you?
I'm okay. Thanks for having me.
All right. We're taping this on the morning after the implosion of the Trump health care plan that failed to get enough votes from its own right wing. And I want to ask you, Joe, just sort of on the top level, is this a huge defeat for the Trump administration? How do you read this?
Well, it was their first big challenge. They were working with, obviously, a Congress of their own party, and especially in the House, where you have a great deal of control of how things happen. They weren't able to do something that their side had promised for a long, long time. It's not good, that's for sure, and it might break, if there's a sense that this is the guy who masters the art of the deal, I think he has to be worried that he's got to get a deal going in somewhere else, because this is not a good sign for his side.
One other point. Do you think that we're talking bipartisan solutions today? Might it, in the little bit longer run, be a good thing if it forces some bipartisanship and maybe bring the Democrats in and not do on a major entitlement program the same thing that happened with Obamacare, is stuff it down the throats of the minority party?
I definitely think that bipartisan solutions are better, for the simple reason that if both sides have ownership, you don't run the risk of having major policy initiatives swinging back and forth with the political pendulum, where you put a big program in place and then you repeal it and then you put it back. And by the time you're done on an important issue like health care, and there are many others, the American people ultimately would suffer from that kind of instability.
All right, man, maybe it's a different time. I'll get your take on this. You were in the Clinton OMB. How did you guys briefly achieve a balanced budget? First one since Eisenhower, the only one since Eisenhower. Would that even be possible today?
We are too far away from a balanced budget at this point, I think, realistically, to expect one again in the near future, which is a real downer to me. You can make changes, you can reduce the current deficit projections, and by doing that put us in a situation where our budget is sustainable. Right now the budget is not sustainable. It'd be wonderful to balance the budget and start paying down debt again, but realistically speaking, what we've got to do is at least get to the point where our debt is not growing faster than our economy is. And that's where we're going to be in just a couple of years.
Okay, as we dive into this, we've got big income inequality. Your book says at a level not seen since the Depression. We've had stagnant wages, particularly in the middle class. The book also says millennials are even entranced with socialism to a rather high degree. Is the American dream dying?
I hope not. I don't think it has to. I do think, just going back to what we were talking about a moment ago, that if we could manage to have some measure of bipartisanship to the point where we weren't concerned that the other guys were trying to take the country down, which is where we are now, with that degree of enmity between the two parties, we could find ways to work together and achieve compromises. But something has got to break that spell of fear and anxiety and distrust, really, between the two parties, between the citizenry and many of our institutions, including business. We need a situation where we at least have a citizenry who believe that our institutions are trying to move in the right direction.
All right, as we sort of set the stage here, some of the interesting statistics you have, some of them pretty scary. The national debt was 106% of GDP during World War II, which kind of makes sense when you're under that level of stress. It got as low as 23% in 1981, which I notice is right before the Reagan deficits started to come. And we're now at, I think, 90-some percent. When is the tipping point?
I wish I knew.
Yeah.
And the problem is that when you recognize that you are at the tipping point, it's already too late. That's really what we have to worry about. The question is, when do investors elsewhere around the world believe that the United States is no longer a safe bet, that our Treasury securities are no longer gilt-edged, as it were? And the problem that we face is that the rest of the world at this point is almost an enabler. An economist I know has said that the United States, in terms of its financial status, is the best-looking horse in the glue factory. The whole world, has deteriorated. Every nation, virtually, including the other major nations among the developed family. And as a result, investors around the world look to figure out where they're going to park their money. They see the United States as shaky as our status is, and they still think we're the best place to go. Our interest rates have been very low for the last half dozen years, and as a result of that, we have been desensitized to the problem of accumulating debt. With interest rates so low, you can pile on debt and you don't see it in the debt service costs. But our debt turns over very quickly. And when interest rates begin to rise, and that process has already started, just to the extent of rising to normal levels historically, the debt service cost is going to rise exponentially because we have all of that debt. The debt turns over very quickly. Our debt on average is relatively short term. A third of our debt rolls over within 1 year. Interest rates go up. The debt service cost goes up very quickly. At some unpredictable point, people might look at us and one morning say, holy cow, I'm not buying any more Treasury securities. This looks too shaky.
That's how these crises tend to happen, even like 2008, right? It's suddenly the change in consensus happens like overnight.
That is the nature of crisis. You're absolutely right. And as I say, when we see that crisis, it will already be too late.
Looking at global trade now, NAFTA and TPP under pressure, obviously, worried that we've got bad deals, that the Trump core supporters are seeing their living standard go down. But you have some scary statistics, too. We've already, global trade's already gone down significantly for some reason since 2014. And trade, though, has grown 2 times the global GDP, so it's helped increase what you call household buying power. Talk a little bit about trade and what does that mean, the improving buying power?
What it means is that because we have goods and, to a lesser extent, services coming into this country that are of lower cost than what we could produce ourselves, and I'll talk about that in just a second, it means that consumers can get more for their money. Doesn't necessarily mean that we are becoming less competitive or less productive. It is just that the way economies work, countries produce what it is that they are best at producing. And here in the United States, we are best at the frontier of technology, very high-value products, very sophisticated products, which other countries can't produce. There are products that other countries can produce, and oftentimes they can do so more cheaply than we can. So what we have to concentrate on the high-tech, high-value sector of the global economy. And if we do that, of course, we're going to have higher incomes because that's where the money is, and take advantage of what the rest of the world can offer in other areas. But that means that we have got to be on our game in terms of education, in terms of investment, R&D, and technology. And to the extent that the financial crisis has slowed us down, we're going to suffer for that.
You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell over the Biz Talk Radio Network, 350 stations around the country. Go to biztalkradio.com, find the station closest to you, listen over the Internet, access our podcast. We'll look into Trump care and health care reform in a little bit more detail next. We're talking with Joe Minarik, SVP of the Committee for Economic Development of the Conference Board. And you say the number one driver for our fiscal situation and debt is Medicare. And so obviously health care was the first thing on their agenda. Looking at Trump care first, some of the components, the capping of federal funding for Medicaid and shifting some of that expense to states, is a move like that a bend the cost curve down that we need, or is it a shredding of the safety net?
I would be concerned that it would be closer to the latter than the former. Mm-hmm. The Medicaid system, if you believe that starving the beast, that offering low reimbursement rates to physicians is going to make them more efficient, we are already doing that in spades. We have to be concerned that trying to reduce reimbursement rates in Medicaid is going to have more an effect of states trying to figure out either how to reduce the services that they're providing or how to induce their own Medicaid populations to move somewhere else. It's a dangerous game in which to operate. And when you consider that health is a driver of productivity, the ability to work for children, the ability to learn and to grow, we probably don't want to go there, in any kind of significant degree.
All right. The coalition yesterday of the Freedom Group that sort of blocked things, one of their issues was eliminating the mandated coverage components that made up Obamacare, and I'm talking mental health, substance abuse, et cetera, which was going to help with deficit reduction, but obviously reduce benefits. How do you come out on that?
One of the things that you have to do in organizing a healthcare system is to determine what it is you're going to cover. That is not something that you can leave to the market. Most of the people who are listening to us get their insurance from their employers. I will guarantee you that virtually nobody who is listening to us has actually read his or her insurance contract. So the question becomes, if you get sick and you file a claim for an expensive treatment, what is it that prevents you from getting a letter from your insurance company saying, oh, by the way, according to our contract, we don't cover that? The thing that prevents you, the thing that protects you is your employer. The Obamacare universe of people being covered is people who do not get insurance from their employers. So who's protecting them? Well, it's got to be the federal government as a regulator of that market. And the danger of a slippery slope, one of the obvious components here in these essential health benefits is maternity care.
Yeah.
It turns out that pre-Obamacare in the individual market, which is what we're talking about here, only about 12% of plans covered maternity care.
Wow.
So if you're a young family and you're thinking about starting a family and your employer doesn't offer health insurance, you were sunk. And the reason why so few plans offer it is if you offer it and you're the only plan that does, every young couple who wants to have children is going to sign up with you, and you're going to be paying for all of the maternity care, and you can't afford that without charging unaffordable premiums. So for all of these components of essential health benefits, and that includes maternity care, it includes, as you said, mental health, which includes substance abuse, many other such kinds of services, either you impose a requirement that everybody does it so that you spread the costs over the entire population, or you run a serious risk of a race to the bottom as insurance plans rush to dump those coverages, and you wind up with health insurance that really doesn't have any value. And if you go back to pre-Obamacare, that was one of people's main concerns. I'm not the world's biggest fan of Obamacare, but one thing that they did right, in my views, and if you leave that to the market is going to deteriorate.
Very interesting. So let's link that now to, you call it the number one driver for out-of-control fiscal situation. Obviously, these mandated benefits cost money. So what are the kinds of drivers that you're suggesting we build into healthcare to get the reform we need? And I know it's more of a market-based approach. Let us know.
Yeah, well, there are basically two approaches to market-driven healthcare. One of them is you tell people, here's a sum of money. You go out and choose your physician and negotiate with him and argue with him over the treatment and argue with him over the price, and that'll drive healthcare down. And you won't go to the doctor if you have the sniffles because you don't want to spend any money. We do not have a healthcare cost problem because of people with the sniffles. We have a healthcare cost problem because of people with multiple chronic conditions, which are very expensive to treat. And we don't have a population. There are certainly some people who do it, but we don't have a population that is inclined to trying to drive their own health care in detail. That's why people hire doctors. Medicine is complicated, and for the most part, people go to a doctor for answers rather than going to the doctor with what they believe the answer is and giving the doctor orders. The other way to make a market-driven health system is to give people a sum of money and tell them, you choose your health insurance plan, and we'll give you enough money to buy an efficient, low-cost plan. If you want a more expensive plan, God bless, go for it, but you pay the increment. And what that says to insurance plans is you've got to deliver value to the consumer, because if you don't, the consumer is going to go somewhere else. What we lack in the system right now is that kind of competition, because so many individuals are assigned a health care plan by their employers. The employer's highest objective is not to make the employees angry. So the employer finds a plain vanilla plan with which everybody will be kind of satisfied. But that doesn't get down to the consumer level where one individual says, I want an integrated plan that has all the physicians in the same building and the specialists and the equipment and so forth. And somebody else says, I want to choose my own doctor. And somebody else says, I want to have a high deductible plan with a health savings account so that I can save my own money and make my own decisions. Those are very different choices. And we need a system where people are given those choices, but driven by value because it's their money that is choosing the plan.
In about 30 seconds, Joe, this kind of market price seems kind of obvious. Why hasn't it been adopted?
The employer-based system tends to drive the way insurance is practiced in the United States. Most people are covered by their employers. The employer looks at a sea of employees and says, I've got to make everybody happy. And that generally dictates plain vanilla fees that are not driven by value.
You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Fixing Washington next. We're talking with Joe Minarik. He's the author of a book, Sustaining Capitalism, Bipartisan Solutions to Restore Trust. If you put that competitive thing in, by the way, you don't think it drives a race to the bottom, and it does lower the cost curve because of the competitive nature?
Well, the race to the bottom is prevented by the essential health benefits, the standards. You have to tell plans that you have got to cover these conditions, and if you don't, you're not allowed to play. It's that simple, and that's why those essential health benefits are so important. In terms of bending the cost curve, there are many providers and plans in our system where essentially you cut costs and it doesn't make any difference. You know, if you're a doctor and you're being reimbursed on a fee schedule and you can actually deliver the service for less, why bother? Because you're going to be reimbursed anyway. Even back office, non-health related aspects of the healthcare industry can get a free pass because of the way our system works with fee-for-service. You know, we need to change that. And if you get to the point where a plan that can offer a lower premium can get more consumers, at that point, other plans look at them and say, hey, I've got to outdo them. And you start having, a race to the top, really.
So fee-for-service is the key thing that needs to go. Quickly, what about tort reform, being able to buy policies across state lines, and that the government doesn't negotiate on drug prices?
I think there are potentially some benefits to tort reform. I think it can be overblown. The typical approach of, reducing maximum pain and suffering damages is really not important. What would be important is you set standards for good practice. What do you do in these conditions? Here's your checklist. Check every box. And if you do that, there's a presumption that you've done your job. I think that helps. In terms of negotiating over drugs, my major concern with the federal government negotiating over drugs is that if you're going to be successful in a negotiation, you have to be able to get up and walk away from the table. And if the federal government is negotiating for everybody, there are drugs out there that people need, and you can't refuse to sell them. So I'm not sure that is really the issue. I think the most important thing is to have plans that can look at individual pharmaceuticals and determine which is the best one in this condition, including consideration of cost.
Crony capitalism, it's a big issue that I have. Tell us exactly what you mean by it and the impact it's having.
When organizations, and they can be business, they can be nonprofits, work with the government to try to protect themselves, to protect their streams of revenue, and to cut off competition, that is what I would call crony capitalism. The crony capitalism nightmare to me is a business or some organization that is doing fine, operating in an old and obsolete way of doing business, but uses political connections to get regulation or through legislation, a subsidy for what they do, a prohibition against new ways of doing things and competition. Competition is what makes the world go round as far as an economist is concerned. But we all would prefer if nobody competed with us. We want people who want to sell us stuff to be competing with one another. But in our line of business, we'd prefer not to have competition. We need competition or else our economic system is going to wither. And to the extent that entities use political connections to protect themselves from competition, that keeps our economy from growing.
All right. What do you see as needed for campaign finance reform and lobbying reform?
The most important thing with respect to campaign finance reform, as far as I am concerned, is finding a way for candidates, and this includes challengers as well as incumbents, to get the money that they need to communicate their message to the people without becoming indebted to individuals who are incumbent interests, who already have it made and are protecting themselves from others who are trying to compete with them. So this is an interaction with crony capitalism. The way to do that, as far as I am concerned, and Steve, my co-author, is to allow the federal government to provide matching funds for small dollar contributions. 4 to 1 or 6 to 1, up to a contribution of $250. And what that does is it tells candidates that you've got to go out and find a lot of people who want to give you money so that you can earn those matching funds. And those individuals at that dollar amount of money cannot possibly command your individual attention and tell you what they want in return for their contributions. If you do that, we will have candidates who can communicate with the people, who do have adequate funding. Incumbents will not be immune from competition. But at the same time, the money will come from sources that cannot make demands for a quid pro quo, for a return on investment, for contributions for political purposes.
On lobbying, the amazing stat to me, 1973, 3% of ex-Congress Congress folks went into lobbying. Now it's 40%. What do we do with that problem?
Lobbying, of course, is constitutionally protected speech. It is the people's right to petition their government. So lobbying per se has got to be allowed. And what we need to do is to try to make sure that it is benign. One way in which lobbying can become a demand for quid pro quo is when lobbying is tied up with campaign finance. So lobbyists become the campaign chairman for candidates for office.
Yeah.
Lobbyists become bundlers and get their friends to contribute, and the lobbyist hands the money over in a large sum to the candidate for office. Those are the kinds of things that we have to cut off if we are to, number one, allow lobbying, which can be important. People in the private sector and the nonprofit sector have to be able to communicate to policymakers and tell them the problems that they see that need to be fixed, but not to put those individuals in a position where they can demand a quid pro quo.
You have some interesting solutions for making the process work in Congress, such as actually making them work a full week together, independent ethics, and talk a little bit about your fixes there, and how do we get districts more competitive with gerrymandering?
We have real issues in Washington with people not communicating with one another, not knowing one another in many instances. It is much more common now for representatives all around the country to refuse to move their families to Washington because you don't want to be captured by the District of Columbia. You want to go back home. Well, as a result of that, you don't know the people on the other side of the aisle. And when you don't know someone, it is much easier to presume that that person is trying to feather his own nest at the cost of the value of the republic. You have people who think of the other political party as the enemy. If they got to know one another better, it would be harder for them to assume the worst. It would be easier for them to think, he's got a point of view, I don't agree with it, but he does have the interest of the country at heart. And when people have that sense, then they start talking to one another and try to find common solutions. So one way to do that is to extend the legislative work week and to have work periods that go over multiple weeks. Make these people sit down and lunch together.
Yeah.
Make them get to know one another. Ideally have them get to know each other's families, which is the way things used to be. And once you do that, you have a much better chance of having bipartisan solutions, and at the very least, a sense of the values of the other guy, which you have to respect even if you disagree his solutions. So that is one of the most important things I think we could do.
All right, we got about a minute to go, and on this one, I want to start some fiscal reform stuff. How do we fix Social Security? We
need to make Social Security sound for the long run, and there are a lot of folks who don't want to hear that. Younger people have to benefit from what we older people got from the system. And to do that, we're going to have to, there are two places to go. We're going to have to reduce benefits, and we're going to have to increase contributions. And really gets down to the details of how do you do that fairly, and that's what we have to work on.
And we should means test?
Well, Social Security already is means tested. It has a benefit formula which provides a higher rate of return for the first dollars of contributions than for the last dollars. So an individual who has a high wage income gets a lower rate of return on his contributions than does a person with a lower rate of return. It's not do we means test, it is to what degree.
I see. You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell from our flagship stations, Yale Radio, WYBC, and Greenwich, 1490 WGCH. More on Turning Around America in our final national segment. And we're talking with Joe Minarik, former OMB chief economist under President Clinton when they actually did balance the budget. And we're going to go through some more important solutions that we need. Education reform.
Yep.
Big one.
Yep, and it's central to our competitiveness as a country and our achieving a greater degree of equality. There are issues from the start to the finish of the educational process, and really the educational process should not finish. We do know that we can get a lot out of investments in preschool education. We don't have enough of our young children, particularly at-risk children, going into preschool, and we need to expand our capacity there to set high standards to hold people accountable. There's a price to be paid if children in the first and second and third grade are already behind, because those are the kids who really lose out in the long run. In elementary school and secondary school, Steve and I believe passionately in the need for standards. We have got to have an understanding of what kids need to learn. It's got to be related to the standards. It's got to be related across the country because people are mobile these days. You need to know that a child who has gone through secondary school has a certain toolkit that he can work with, and that toolkit is the same for employers all across the country. So what kids learn has got to be the same. Post-secondary school, we are falling behind our competitors in completions at the post-secondary level. And a lot of the kids who are not making it are coming from families where nobody has gone to college. They are kids who started and ran out of money, or perhaps started and got off track. They're older, they have jobs, some of them have family responsibilities. We have got to create institutions so that these unconventional students have a chance to learn in an environment where they're really going to get something from the education.
Interesting. We had a guest on who said that the Labor Department should become the Department of Workforce Management and help that skills mismatch that we have, and also geographic mismatch where the jobs are. So interesting. One thing that I wish you had included is choice. I know that in the inner cities, choice seems to be the only thing that's working in the elementary school level.
Well, the inner cities are tremendously challenged. To the extent that you can make a choice system work, to the extent that you can get adequate financing, to the extent that you are not leaving some of your children behind, choice has a role to play. And I support the operations of charter schools. I'd like to see them find ways to deliver education better. I'd like to see those ideas diffused through the entire system.
Yes.
We don't want to have kids left behind.
Okay, immigration reform. You have some interesting ideas on us adopting some of the approach Canada uses.
Canada tries to match immigration slots to the skills that are needed in our economy. One of the things you look forward, we have an aging population who are going to be in need of health care, not just at the sophisticated physician level, but also in terms of assistance with just managing their daily lives. We do not have the native-born population moving into those kinds of jobs. And if we don't want those jobs to go begging, we need to think about having people come into the country who are willing and able to do those jobs. The same is true through other areas of skills, but healthcare is really one of the most prominent areas where we're falling short.
A big issue for me, too, is on Wall Street or corporate America is the short-term focus on everything, quarterly profits, which to me shouldn't even mean anything. What ideas do you have for short-termism?
Short-termism is a tremendous challenge, as just one fact. Over the last half century, we've gone from a majority of shares owned by individual investors who tend to be patient to a majority of shares owned by institutions who are watching over those shares minute by minute and moving the money around all the time. And it is those kinds of institutions and private capital funds and whatever who tend to make the demands on firms, I want my money and I want it now. We urge corporations going forward to make clear to investors that they are following long-term strategies because they believe it is best for all of the firm's constituents, which includes its investors, but also includes its customers, its employees, and the communities that surround it, and the environment. And if business leaders stand up and emphasize the importance of that multi-stakeholder approach and a long-term approach, we believe that business standing together and speaking up can help to change the environment in our equity markets these days.
All right, as we get down towards the end here, there's been an erosion of trust, which you cite. I mean, nobody went to jail in 2008 when all these banks were bailed out, but that's just sort of an image kind of thing. What do we need to do to sort of change the culture and bring and restore trust?
I believe that business leaders have got to climb out of the foxhole, where they now tend to be hunched down, trying to avoid being hit by the rocks that are being thrown. They've got to get out together, and they've got to speak up, and they've got to explain what it is they're doing, how they are creating jobs, how they are helping people to live better lives, and what we as a society can do together to achieve more in that direction. Individual business leaders, and we have some business leaders who have a lot of personal currency, as it were, and sometimes they tend to stand up and they're saying the right things, but I fear that for an individual business executive to take advantage of his own podium tends to isolate that person, and it tends to look like it's self-serving. And it doesn't communicate what the business community together sees as its values and what it is trying to achieve. I think we would do much better if we had business leaders working together and trying to explain, to create an environment in which individuals understand what the challenges are to business leaders, what the challenges are to our businesses, what international competition means, why they have to be successful, what it is they have to do to be successful in a competitive environment, but how they are trying to raise living standards for all the people who work for them.
Hopefully bring the whole nation together from Washington and Wall Street. Thanks to Joe Minarik. That book again, Sustaining Capitalism, Bipartisan Solutions to Restore Trust and Prosperity. This has been Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Thanks to Joe. Thanks to our national audience for listening. We'll see everybody next Sunday on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. And you're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Joe Minarik nicely agreeing to stay with us in our overtime segment. We're more on bipartisan solutions to save America. And, Joe, I wanted to go through, do you agree, I assume, that we have to get our long-term GDP growth back up from 2% and even lower to even 3% and up, which would be a 50% increase, and driven by productivity and labor supply growth? Do you think we can get there?
One thing that I think we do have to recognize, and it makes it clear what the challenge is here, our adult population, working age population, is growing significantly more slowly than it did just a little while ago. Arithmetic. The senior class of the baby boom was born in 1946. The minimum age for collecting reduced Social Security benefits is 62. 1946 plus 62 is 2008. The baby boom started collecting Social Security benefits and retiring in 2008. It's now 2017. Pre-2008, our labor force was growing at north of 1% per year. Our labor force is now growing at a rate that is very close to zero.
Wow.
We're at the point where entries and retirements are virtually equal. Entries are only slightly greater. Now, that's the ultimate limit on how much our labor force can grow. And, it is just arithmetic that the rate of growth of our labor force is an ingredient of the ultimate potential rate of growth of our output. That decline of the rate of growth of our labor force of 1 percentage point per year comes right off the top of what we conceivably can achieve. So now we're looking at productivity growth.
Yeah.
Do we want faster productivity growth? Absolutely. That means making a lot of decisions that are focused on the long term rather than the short term. So the business executive who is under pressure to hit numbers this quarter and decides that the one way to do it is to postpone an R&D project is, in effect, postponing the growth in productivity, which ultimately will make us all wealthier. And that's a real challenge to where we are.
Very interesting. Let me ask you, so to get a 50% increase, even just to 3%, mathematically looks very challenging. And part two of that question, it would suggest we shouldn't be trying to stifle immigration, right, for labor supply.
Yeah, I mean, first, again, the arithmetic. If your rate of growth is 1% of by labor force, 1% by productivity growth equals 2%. And you want to get up to 3%. And your labor force growth goes to zero.
Yeah.
You're not doubling your productivity growth. You're tripling it to hit that target. And obviously, that's very hard. I mean, every businessman and woman in this country is out there trying to figure out how to increase productivity growth. And we're saying now we want even more than what they're able to turn up, given what they're trying to do. So that's a real challenge. And it does say that one way to reduce, well, there's no way we can possibly eliminate, but one way to reduce the loss of growth because of the slowdown of the rate of growth of our labor force is to take advantage of immigration, particularly looking at skills that our country most needs.
So that drives me right to trade, which obviously we'd like to grow our net exports over time. And at the same time, we've got pressure that we should be breaking these agreements we've made. I wonder what your opinions are, walking away from TPP, for instance, Trans-Pacific Partnership. And what is the line? Can there be a line that between fair trade and sinking into trade wars?
We definitely need to take advantage of the opportunity to export if we are going to grow as an economy. What the rest of the world needs that we alone can produce is the high-tech, high-end segment of the market. We need to recognize as a society that if you want to export, you have to import. If we decide that we are not willing to accept other countries' production, that does two things. Number one, it sends them a signal that they should not accept ours. The second thing is that many of the products, the high-value products where we have a comparative advantage, are products that involve components that come from different levels of the production chain. The automobile industry has been highlighted as an industry where we take components from other countries, particularly Canada and Mexico, and put them into the most sophisticated parts of the product, which we build, to come up with an ultimate product which we can not only consume domestically, but also sell elsewhere around the world. And if we decide that we are going to refuse to take part in those kinds of sophisticated supply chains, we're going to lose. We're going to be taking to ourselves the lower value parts of the production process, and we're going to be losing out on sales that involve the higher value end of the production chain. So we really need to work collectively with the rest of the world, and Canada and Mexico are our prime trade partners in this respect. We need to work with other countries and accept the fact that trade is good for everybody. It's not I win, you lose. It's I win and you win too. And that's why people do business. If people are put in a position where they are on the losing side of a deal, they don't want to play. How do we keep trade fair? We do need to make sure that we don't allow crony capitalism to find its way into trade agreements. We can't earmark particular businesses, particular industries, and say that they will be protected from competition in a trade agreement. It's painful sometimes to expose yourself to competition. You have to understand that if you insist that nobody will compete with you, others will make the same demand, and you're not in the moral high ground to refuse that. And if we get to the point where people break off trade agreements, we're getting right back to where we were in the 1930s, and we don't want to be there.
Good points. And I keep thinking that President Trump was elected to create economic growth, and when your first moves are anti-trade and anti-immigration, you're shooting your own math in the foot. Talking about crony capitalism, give us the example of the impact of what sugar subsidies have on American consumers.
Well, we've decided that we want to protect some U.S. producers of sweeteners and sugar products. And in doing that, we refuse to import cheaper sweeteners that would be available overseas. And what you find, the clearest manifestation of what is going on is the adversarial relationship between U.S. sugar producers and U.S. sugar users in the business sector, because they have to pay more for sweeteners to put into their products, be they chocolates, cereals, soft drinks, whatever, than they would if they were simply allowed to import product. So it's an illustration of the fact that when you decide that you are going to protect one segment of your economy, other segments of your economy will bear a cost, your pigs, as it were. And in the long run, that is not good for the U.S. economy, and it's not good for economic growth. Okay,
talking about unintended costs, pretty startling statistic in your book that to comply with federal regulations is $10 billion a year, total of $100 billion for all of them. Now we look at the other side, that in 2008 we had this financial crash because of not strong enough regulation in part. What do we do about regulations, federal regulations?
Well, some people say that we have too much regulation. We're not sure that we have too much regulation. We're quite confident that we have inferior regulation. We don't do the job as well as we could. There are a number of aspects of the problem, but one of the most striking ones, when you compare the United States with other countries, we do a much poorer job of monitoring the effects of regulations after the fact. The world changes. We put regulations in place, and then we walk away. It's a kind of a set it and forget it attitude. The result is that the world changes, regulations become less suited to the conditions in our economy, and we don't do anything about it. And regulations pile up on top of regulations. They get older and older. They become less visible. And after a while, you get to the point where there is a lot of regulatory cost. It bears heavily on smaller businesses because they can't, they don't have their own legal departments. We need to do a better job of ex post evaluation of our regulatory system and the regulations we put in place. And one of the things that we have to recognize is that that kind of efficient regulation costs money at the regulatory, at the government level, because you have to collect data so that you can evaluate how those regulations are doing. And you need the people to make those evaluations. And by human nature, you can't expect the people who created a regulation to go back and say, oops, we didn't do it right. So evaluation and the creation of regulations really have to be two different functions. So putting more money into regulation does not necessarily mean more regulation. If we play our cards right, it will mean better regulation and more efficient regulation. And ultimately, when you take into account the private sector, which of course is the real point of all this, it will mean better regulation and less costly regulation.
Interesting. Now, in the proposed budget of President Trump, there's a recommendation for a 37% cut of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. Is that something that you deem feasible or dangerous?
A lot of the numbers in the Trump budget are pretty big, round numbers. We in our book do not spend specific time looking at the environmental regulation area. But we do, as I mentioned a moment ago, have some concern that in many areas of regulation, we are not doing enough to make sure that our regulations are efficient. You can't evaluate the efficiency of a regulation without data. You have to go out there and measure what is happening in the regulated industry. Are changes in the performance of the industry driven by regulation, or are they driven by something else? Are coal mines being affected by regulation, or are they being affected by the falling price of natural gas? If you want to answer those kinds of questions, you need information, you need data. And historically, we have not been doing enough in that direction. And you can't cut your workforce in half and then tell the remaining people that to do all of this additional work, they're going to have to work their lunch hours. That doesn't work. So we believe that cutting funding for regulation is not really the answer. The answer in many areas is going to be putting more resources into regulation to help to do a better and a more efficient job.
So what I kind of hear is that if the EPA did a better job on the effectiveness and the cost-benefit, then maybe a cut might be valid, but not just such a radical cut before that. Is that what you're saying?
I think we need to do a lot more evaluation. We need to determine whether a particular attempt at reducing emissions is in fact getting a return.
Yes.
We don't want to mandate technology. We want to mandate performance.
I want to go back to Gridlock now, and one of the big problems appears to be that the districts in Congress are non-competitive, which means they have to appeal within their party to the fringes. How do we fix that?
Unfortunately, this has been a very difficult issue to work with at the national level. There have been examples at the state level. Several states, California, Arizona, have created commissions that are nonpartisan. They have given them criteria to evaluate the jobs they're doing, and included in the watchwords of redistricting, which includes that districts should be equal, they should be compact, they should be contiguous. They're adding as the last criterion that districts should be competitive. The cost of going the other way is exactly as you said, which is to say that you get to the point where you have districts that are created to protect incumbents. And it is in the nature of the arithmetic that if I'm going to protect my incumbents, by doing that, I'm going to be protecting the other side's incumbents. I want to get their voters out of my district. Well, I've got to pack them into their district. So that protects their incumbents as well as my own. And when you get to the point where the general election is a foregone conclusion, but the real election is the primary, and understanding that the turnout in the primary election is very heavily pushed to the true believers at the extremes of the political spectrum, you get to the point where the one thing that a sitting member of Congress fears is a challenge from his flank, a challenge from the extreme wing of his party. And if you want to cut that off, you've got to be extreme. And if you're extreme in Congress, that means that you are refusing to cooperate in any way, shape, or form with the other side because they are the enemy to that constituency you're worried about. And if you're a collaborator, they're going to come and get you. And that means that we have members of Congress who don't talk to one another. We don't have recognition of the shared values that they have. We don't have an acceptance of the mission of trying to find a way to put together coalitions to solve our problems. We take our problems and instead of solving them, we pickle them. And we put them on the shelf and we save them for the next election. And we pray that we run the table and we get 60 votes in the Senate and we get a big majority in the House and we get the White House and then we can fix it our way. And of course what we've seen historically is when we get to that point, the majorities start to think, well, if I take a chance on solving these problems, I'm going to lose my majority. So I'm going to play it safe and I'm not going to deal with this problem anyway. And we've got some problems that are ready to boil over. We've got the budget. We have health care. I could go on and on. We need to have a system where we have the two sides getting together in the middle and finding ways to address these problems in a cooperative way.
It's interesting as we finish up that sustaining capitalism obviously thrives on competition, and we've gone through crony capitalism subsidies, health care lack of competition, and Congress lack of competition. So we're kind of working at cross purposes with our own principle, right?
Well, very much so. You can read some history books that, have theories of the broad sweep of history and the way in which civilizations and nations die is when they become so ossified in protecting existing interests.
Good point.
That they're not competitive, and other nations and other civilizations come in and outcompete them.
This has been a fascinating hour. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground. We have a lot of challenges in front of us, and let's hope we can start to get our arms wrapped around it. You've been listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell, and our podcast available at iTunes, WYBC, BizTalkRadio.com. Our next show, we've got Wall Street critic, normally he's written books on the fall of Bear Stearns and on Goldman Sachs, Bill Cohen, but he's got a new book out, Why We Need Wall Street. Thanks to Joe Minarik. Thanks to the Committee for Economic Development of the Conference Board and his partner on the book, Steve Odland, for putting these bipartisan solutions together. Our show always is focused on this middle and trying to get things done and fight our way through gridlock. Thanks to our audience for staying with us on Overtime. It's Business Talk with Jim Campbell.